Roisin from Do Cymru Welsh Water, and I sit on the Local Resilience Forum, and I'm the chair of the Welsh branch of the EPS as well. In the COVID response, I was responsible for the PPE in the North Wales LRF region. So we set up a subgroup to sort PPE and to try and source PPE. Through some of the local comprehensive schools that created PPE for us, and then delivered that to NHS and to undertakers at the same time. We were not allowed to use that PPE due to health and safety restrictions, such as the kite mark. So what can we do to stop government departments or health and safety stopping that use of a resource that was probably fine to use? Open to the panel. Thank you.
We've got to get you Andrew to answer that.
I'm not sure I have a good answer. To be honest, it's not obviously our research project during the COVID. PPE was certainly one of the issues that was raised. I'm obviously not just in UK context, but there were over 20 people from over 20 countries that we were interfacing with, and they were all experiencing different levels of difficulty. I don't know a specific answer for that, other than obviously things need to be resolved through dialogue processes. So clearly there needs to be some sort of process where that kind of dialogue can happen. I don't have a specific answer because we weren't focusing in on the kind of the granularity of some of the issues like that, but it's something that obviously should be taken through appropriate mechanisms and that sort of process engaged. And clearly there may be others within the room perhaps that perhaps have a better answer for that. So apologies.
Thank you. Yes, no question.
Chris Samuel from the Joint Cheshire Emergency Planning Team. This is for Andrew and Roisin. The pilots that are being run, there's one in South Yorkshire, there's one in Greater Manchester. I think the one in Greater Manchester was looking at the vulnerable and the elderly during heat waves. I just wondered, has that been implemented now, and is there any findings coming out from that? How, just be interested to hear how that one's going.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm happy to pick up on that one, Andrew, if you want to add anything from South Yorkshire perspective. But I myself have been particularly involved with the GM case. And that pilot work, which is being led by SULAFA at GMRF. So I've been working really closely with SULAFA, and our team have been involved, for example, throughout the process. Really, I mean, thinking about the GM pilot, we recently ran, in collaboration with GM, an exercise which essentially tested the project in a way, and was an awareness and an information sharing session. But work with Greater Manchester and that pilot began just over a year ago. So in terms of the journey of that pilot, originally our team was essentially kind of engaged, with GM RF in terms of, what does this look like, where to start and what to do. And you're correct in saying the focus of that pilot project was on older people in Salford. So we focused on Salford. And the context was extreme heat, which translated as we moved into winter in the exercise into adverse weather, because it can sometimes be difficult to talk about extreme heat when it's lashing outside. But in terms of the outputs of that project, some of the activities involved a session that brought together both citizens, volunteers, voluntary organisations that work in Salford, and also services. So bringing everybody together and really trying to kind of understand and achieve a shared understanding of what needs are and what services do, and where perhaps the gaps might be. I realise I'm slightly rambling on now. I'm getting into maybe a bit too much of the detail, but the outputs, particularly from those early sessions, which involved talking to individuals themselves that might perhaps, experience impacts in a particular way because of their vulnerability, but also, bringing in older people as a part of society that are also part of the solution, you know, and understanding how they can support organisations that support those. So we the kind of key outputs that came from all of that work culminated in an exercise. Salford CBS were a core partner and are a well-established structure in Salford. So key outputs have been that session running, as well as a test of understanding how the system operates in a certain scenario. Was also an information session around extreme weather, climate extremes, and very much looking at setting up how to perhaps establish a voluntary capability that actually collaborates a bit wider, involves the University of Manchester, Salford University. I believe there was conversations with Salford as well. I suppose maybe two of the key points was a door knocking capability was seen as key from an individual's perspective, having a slightly framed as a 30-second response, but in terms of that really hyper-local neighbourhood level connections and door knocking capability in terms of welfare checks, etc. And communication and information and central points where both organisations can understand how they get support. You know, if, for example, they need additional resource, if they're responding in a particular community and they're maybe running low, and how that information feeds back up the system. So that's kind of where everything is at with GM. I know that it's continuing. But in terms of the feedback within the system was a particular output, and really bringing people into the same room and having a conversation on this. I'm sorry, I've completely run over.
Ed Spacey, London South Bank University. I'd particularly like to thank the last speaker for the points about ownership and engagement around local risk. And I just wondered, are there any top tips from your research or experience in order to cultivate the right levels of engagement, please?
Ownership engagement. Yeah, so I think really it really is about inclusive processes in terms of local planning processes. I mean, when there is the local authorities, local governments are involved in planning processes, whether it's sectoral planning or land use planning, like the Kingston Development Plan, as I've been involved in. It's about bringing a cross section of people, a broad constituency within their administrative area, involving them in that planning process and listening to their perspectives, but also not just doing it as a tick box exercise. You know, recognize that it is about ownership, and it's about people. Then what you want is the agency to act is probably the most critical resource. You know, I remember I had a conversation with Margrethe Wallström, who was the head of the UN ISDR, and I was complaining as a civil society. I have no resource. I've not, you know. She said, you know, Marcus, the paradox of the system is, she said that I've worked my way up. I'm now up to the, deputy to the UN Secretary General. So she's high up the system. She said the paradox is, the higher you go up the system, thinking that is where you can influence the system. She said the less the will to want to change the system is, the higher you go up. So she said what you have and the groups that you have at the local level is that desire, that agency to act. You know, it's where there's a will, there's a way, as we say in English. And there has to be that level of engagement and recognition that one of the greatest capacities in our societies is the ability of people to act, the agency of people. But to do that, they have to be part of the process. There has to be ownership and engagement and genuine partnership and participation. So it's gold, but it requires genuine engagement to actually do it. But the local planning processes, because it has to be relevant to people. It has to be relevant, yeah.